Hey guys, my name is Iasmina and welcome back to my channel. So today I want to talk to you guys about the 10 things I learned while writing my first book. I spent about 6 years in total writing and editing my first book, Hunting Vienna. It was the first book I ever finished, but definitely not the only one I ever attempted to write. In fact, I started so many novels and so many stories, but eventually they all petered out. I lost interest, I couldn't figure out where the plot was going, and so I just kind of threw them away. But in the 6 years of writing and editing my first novel, Hunting Vienna, I learned so much, and I really want to share some of this knowledge with you. But please, as with anything, these are just my experiences and what I learned from them. What works for me might not necessarily work for you. So please take any writing advice with that bit of a grain of salt. Nevertheless, I hope this might be entertaining or at least a bit inspirational to some of you guys. So without further ado, here are 10 things I learned writing my first book. Number 1, planning is key. So as I've already mentioned, I've attempted to write plenty of books before, but without a plan, they just petered out into nothingness. So when I began writing Hunting Vienna, I wanted to plan out a bit more. The main plot of my first book, Hunting Vienna, revolves around a scavenger hunt of historical artifacts around Vienna. So I needed to do a lot of research for all the landmarks that I would put into the scavenger hunt and all the clues to make sense and the history behind everything. But I wrongly thought that that amount of planning would be enough to pull me through the entire book. As you can imagine, I was very, very wrong. My first draft ended up about double the length that it should have been, and I had to scrap maybe 80% of it. I basically rewrote it completely from scratch twice, and then I heavily revised it a few more times. And also, the first draft took me 3 years to finish, so, you know, that's bad. Don't get me wrong, writing by the seat of your pants definitely works for some, and I heavily admire those people. And it can be really fun, which is why I rely on it sometimes, but it just does not completely work for me. So basically I learned that I need to plan out the story, otherwise I meander too much and it takes me way too long to get to the heart of what I'm trying to really achieve with this. So I mentioned in one of my last videos that what I use is the beat sheet method by Blake Snyder for the book Save the Cat. And actually this corkboard you see behind me, that is actually it for the second book that I'm writing. So that's basically the beat sheet method on little post-it notes. Just forever pinned on my board so that I always see it and I never forget what I'm trying to write. But doing it with the beat sheet method gives me enough freedom so that I can still write by the seat of my pants sometimes and bask in the glory of exploring my own story, while at the same time keeping me grounded and always knowing where I need to end up, basically. Point number 2 is Google doesn't always count as research. What? Google doesn't know everything? I know, shocking, right? But honestly, it doesn't. So Hunting Vienna takes place, as the title neatly suggests, in Austria's capital, Vienna, which is actually my favorite city, at least my favorite city that I've ever been to. Even before I knew anything about this book, I knew that I wanted to write a book set in Vienna. And so that was the first idea that popped into my head. I've visited Vienna twice now. 2 times during high school, actually. If you want to see some really embarrassing pictures of me in high school in Vienna, you can click the link to my website in the description bar. That'll have the post with this video on it as well. But yeah, so I've been there twice during high school and I took copious amounts of pictures. And so I thought I had enough of a reference to all the places that I wanted to write about and relying on my own memories of them. But because my story focused a lot on the history behind all of these landmarks, I needed to do a lot more research. Just because you're visiting someplace doesn't necessarily mean you learn anything about the places you see. That is also a theme I explore in my book, Hunting Vienna. Have I mentioned this title enough to you? Hunting Vienna. But the problem with the research I was trying to do was that Google did enough in some cases, but when you need to go down to the really nitty-gritty of something, it's just not reliable enough for me, and I don't want to write something stupid, especially when it's history. I don't want to get my facts wrong. So basically, you need to find other ways to get this information, and preferably more credible ways to get this information. So read books about the topic that you're writing. Ask professors maybe that are specialized in this. So if you're writing about someone being shot and what that feels like and what it looks like, don't just rely on your imagination, or worse, movies to write that, but ask a doctor, or ask someone who has seen it. Of course, if you're writing about a specific city, like I am, go to that city and take copious notes of what you're seeing and how you're feeling while you're seeing these things. Talk to people who live there. Find other ways to gather all this information, and I guarantee you that even if all this stuff doesn't make it into the final book, your pool of knowledge will have increased by so much, and next time you'll be able to write these things a lot better. But now I joke a lot about the fact that I can basically be a tour guide for Vienna because I know so much about it now. So if you ever want a random YouTube person take you on a tour to Vienna, hit me up. The third point is that titles are really hard. Honestly, coming up with titles can sometimes feel like magic, just that spark of eureka. You know it before you even know what the book is about. While other times it feels and looks like one of those detective walls with the strings and trying to figure out the connections for all the events. Yeah. So yeah, some books you know the title before you even write the thing, while others can take draft after draft after draft until you get so frustrated that you cannot find the perfect title. You just want to publish it under the working title. Document one it is then. So with my own book, I pretty much called it Eurodaniel for the longest time, to the point where I could not think of it as anything other than Eurodaniel. Obviously there are some tricks to help you come up with titles, such as, forming word clouds of the main themes in your book, the main characters, maybe some quotes that you really like. Some authors even use song names or song lyrics, but I'm not entirely sure on the copyright laws of that. Also with titles, you have to remember that if you're planning on traditionally publishing, your publisher or your editor might change your title to something that they think will attract more readers to it. So if you did come up with a perfect title, try not to get too attached, because it might not fit with what the publisher is trying to achieve with your book. Of course, if you're self-publishing, you can name it Document 1, you can name it Eurodaniel, you can name it whatever you want. Also, when it comes to traditional publishing and querying agents, this is also kind of a weird thing, because if the title of your book is bad, I don't think any agent would reject it solely based on that. If the query and the pages are good, they will request more, they will want to read it regardless of the title. But on the other side, if your title is really good and it really catches that agent's attention, that can mean that agent pays a little more attention to what they're reading. In general, I would just say try not to stress too much on the title of your book, because it is hard most of the time. I had to resort to the word cloud method and to coming up with the most ridiculous names for the book until I finally almost settled on Hunting Vienna. We shall see if it ever changes. If I go with the traditional publishing route, it might. Point number 4 is that first page / first sentence is critical. Of all the extensive editing and revising I've done to this book, the part that changed the most was the first paragraph / the first page. When you first write the draft, you don't even think about it, you just start writing it and you don't really care. But the problem is that it matters a lot more than you might initially think. There is so much punch you can throw with just that first sentence, hell, that first word even. And especially with traditionally publishing, again, agents and editors put a lot of importance into that first paragraph. Because as a reader, when you're browsing a bookshop and you're just picking up books, you might read the blurb, you might not, but you might just flip to the first page and just glaze over the first sentence. If it doesn't catch you, then you're just gonna put it back down and pick something else up again. But if it's something that really, punches you in the face, or makes you laugh, or makes you cry, then you're a lot more likely to continue reading. Personally, I would never put down a book if the first sentence was mediocre, but you have to understand that agents and editors go through hundreds and hundreds of these submissions every month, and the sooner they can call your book boring, the sooner that it no longer catches their attention, they're just gonna move on to the next thing. And you really don't want them to get bored after the first sentence. I've definitely started paying a lot more attention to the beginnings of books, and I do find myself so much more excited to read the rest of the book if that first page is really good. And so I put a lot of effort into honing my first page and my first sentence. There's so many ways you can go about it too, how are you going to play with it? Is it going to tie up the theme of the book really neatly? Is it going to reference the end of the book, although of course you will only know that after you've read the book? Are you going to make your readers laugh, just really put them in that good mood? Are you going to punch them in the feels? There's so many ways to go about it, and I think it can be quite interesting to think about and just play around with. Point number 5 is that writing is rewriting. This feels incredibly obvious to me now, and yet I constantly see, new writers on forums that have just finished the first draft of their book and they're looking to publish it and they're looking to see, what is the fastest way to get that draft out there for the readers. But the absolute truth that every new writer must learn one way or another is that your first draft is a pile of trash that you accidentally set on fire twice. Unless you've already written a few books, unless you're a very, very polished, experienced writer, this is the truth. Revising and editing that pile of trash is the only way to ever get to having that book that you imagined in your head. It just takes a while to get there, and it takes a lot of work to get there. And actually what I learned is that this is my favorite part of the process. To see that first draft transform after draft and after draft into this beautiful thing that you look at and you can't quite believe that you wrote these words is such a magical feeling. Now I have 7 drafts of Hunting Vienna. Yep, you heard me right, 7. If you look at the first draft and if you look at the 7th, they are completely different books. The only thing that's still the same is this scavenger hunt concept and some of the clues in there. Now after the 3rd draft, the rest of them are not quite so different, so there's just, a bit more polishing, a few bits that are moved around and things like that. Editing is the answer to writing a good book. Get the setting right. Now I love interesting settings. World building and fantasy is one of the best things I can spend my time thinking about. I just love coming up with world building ideas and coming up with different magic systems and all of that stuff. It's fantastic. But even in more contemporary books, having an interesting setting to me really, really transforms the entire book. Even if your book takes place in, small town America, try to make it unique. Try to make it seem like it's not just another small town America. I am a sucker for books set in interesting locations, something that I haven't read about yet. May it be a real place or a completely invented one. But wherever you set your book, you have to make it come alive. Now I realized embarrassingly late into the editing process that all of the people in my book spoke English. And that's fine for the main characters, but they were meeting random people on the streets of Vienna, the capital of Austria, a German-speaking country, and everyone spoke perfect, flawless English. Make sure some of the people that they meet struggle a bit with trying to communicate with them. Maybe they respond in German. If one of your characters comes from an interesting background, like a culturally different background, I'm sure they have some mannerisms and some way of talking that makes them interesting and makes them unique. So utilize that. If your story is set in England and it never rains for the entirety of your story, I would hope that at least your characters would have something to say to that. They would notice that, right? And you must have a really, really good reason for that to happen. So think about these things, because it might not seem important to you, but it takes the reader out of the setting, it takes the reader out of the story. My next point is to kill some of your darlings. One of the most common writing advice you will see or you will get is kill your darlings. And this basically means, all those scenes that you fell in love writing with, all of the characters that don't necessarily do much but you love. They don't affect the plot in any meaningful way, and so they must go. In some cases, this is true. If you've written all of these side characters that are just there, that don't contribute to the plot, that don't influence the main character, that don't even contribute to world building, they just do nothing, they're just there, then yes, you have to remove them. If you've written a scene that does not move the plot forward, then yes, you have to remove it. However, I learned that in most cases you can rearrange these things a little bit. You can rewrite those scenes, you can rewrite those characters and make them make sense. Make them contribute to the plot. If you have a side character that you really, really love, maybe instead of taking it out, combine the attributes of the character that you really like into another character. So blend 2 characters into one. Rewrite scenes so they move the plot forward. Make them matter. Make them do more than one thing. This is another thing in storytelling. Every scene must do 3 things. Character development, move the plot forward, and enrich the setting. If your scene doesn't do any of those things, then either take it out or completely rewrite it so that it includes at least 2 of these things, but better yet, all 3 of them. So I learned that you don't necessarily have to cut out all of your darlings. Try to play around a bit with them and try to see if you can move them and change them so that they make sense to the plot and so that you can keep some of your darlings. I completely trashed an entire chapter of the book. Of course, I had trashed a lot of it, but this one particular chapter, I knew that there was no way I could ever make it make sense. It was something that I did to get out of a writer's block, and it worked. I completely adored writing that chapter, and every time I remember it or read through it, it's so funny and it makes me laugh and it's so completely wonderful, and yet it makes absolutely no sense. It's a complete tangent. I don't think I'll ever do anything with it. I might post it on the blog at some point if I can. I also repurposed a lot of dialogue and, jokes here and there, and most of the time they fit much better in the place that I moved them to than they originally did. So, try it out. The next point is that the stakes must be high. So for commercial fiction, when you start querying, if you're going the traditional publishing route, you will hear the phrase high stakes a lot. This basically means, what are the consequences if your character fails the plot of the story? So what's at stake for the character or for the world? This of course ties into character motivation and really the entire point of the story. Why are you writing this? Why does it matter? If there's nothing for the character to lose, then why bother? Again, I love stories with high stakes. I love stories with competitions, which mine is. Again, this scavenger hunt in Vienna is actually a part of a competition with a very big prize attached to it, and prize is something that my character really, really needs. And what I learned was that initially my stakes were just not high enough. Even when it's a contemporary novel, no one has to die for it to be high stakes. The character's life doesn't have to end, the world doesn't have to be destroyed at the end for it to be high stakes. If the end goal is to get the crush to like you back, or to pass this exam to get into this university, not achieving that has to feel to the character as if, a family member would die, or as if their world would be forever changed. And so I completely rewrote my main character's motivation to tie into this. I upped the stakes for the competition so much more. I added in a time limit as well for the competition, but that helps a lot with the pacing and making it go faster. I also added in a lot more competitors that these characters see, so that there's a better sense that this is anyone's game, right? Second to last point is that hating your work is entirely normal. So like the famous 7 stages of grief, I think that writers have something similar, although instead of stages, it's basically a circle of either loving or hating the book that you're writing. First there will always be the excitement of having come up with this idea. It's a brilliant idea. And then you finish it and you look at it and you realize that it's a pile of trash and that you're not worthy to ever write this story, and why did you even bother? And then you think, okay, I'll sit down and I'll edit it. Because editing makes the story better, right? So if I just completely rewrite it, it'll be better. But then you realize that you can continue to edit it and edit it and edit it some more until you hate every single word of your story again. Just the mere thought of your book makes you want to throw up into your hands, smear it on the screen, and then go live on some isolated island somewhere alone for the rest of your life. So writing this book drove me mad sometimes. But I eventually learned that that is completely normal. You will love it and then you will hate it, followed by more love, followed by intense, burning, painful hatred. But as long as you eventually go back to the loving part, it's okay. It's completely normal. And finally, point number 10 that I want to make is to make yourself laugh. So as kind of a follow-up to the circle of love and hate, I learned that if you can make yourself laugh, or cry, or despair, or angry, or really any feeling, if you can evoke those feelings in yourself from your own writing, then you will probably evoke those same feelings in other people. Always after taking some time off from working on the book and then coming back to it again, I would just find myself laughing at my own jokes or just smiling continuously as my eyes moved over these words that I couldn't quite believe I had written. But more than anything, that was the feeling that made me believe in my story again and again. Believe that as much as I'm enjoying this, other people will enjoy it at least as much. Because obviously they don't know where the story is going. I know, and I know every facet of it, and yet I still surprise myself. So those were 10 things I learned writing my first book, Hunting Vienna. Of course, I learned a lot more from this entire experience than that, but these are just 10 things. Honestly, I think the best thing that came out of this entire experience is really the realization that this is something that I can actually do. You know, I can be an author. I'm actually good at this. It's not just some vague desire in my head, but it's actually a career that might be a viable option for me. Of course, with a lot of time and practice. And so since finishing that first draft of Hunting Vienna, I've basically gone full throttle on achieving this dream. I started working on it every single day, either editing or writing something new. I've started many other projects as well, and I'm currently working on 2 of them, one of them being the thing that you see behind me, which I'm almost done drafting. Is actually taking me a fraction of the time that it took to write the first draft of my first book. Again, writing books and especially publishing them is a very slow and long process, but I am confident that I'll get there eventually, one way or another. But that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble about these things. As always, if you like what you're seeing, please subscribe to this channel and click the little notifications icon. But thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next Monday. Obligatory cat tucks. This is Nami, and she's been scratching at my door trying to get into my bedroom, and now she just wants to go. Okay, bye. Bye.